Hi, this is Christoph, and here's an overview of the Monero Explorer project that I'm currently experimenting with. So the typical Monero Explorer looks like this, or like this, or like this, or this. And most blockchain Explorer looks like this. And if you just imagine yourself not being a technical person, then this looks like just a wall of numbers and looks very cryptic. You know, what does extra mean? What's a mixin? What is tx underscore hash? You know, what do I do with this information? It's very tricky to figure out. Explorers are incredibly useful and amazing transparency, but for a normal person, it's just pretty cryptic. And there's no help here. It doesn't tell me what I can do with this. I have to know or I have to figure it out somehow. So my goal was to highlight these key use cases and just put them at the very front. And that's looks like this. So again, I still have my search option here. I can type in a transaction ID, look for a specific blog. And then it asks me the two key things that people seem to want to do with this from just that I heard from when I asked people. So when I send Monero to somebody, I want to send them a transaction receipt. So let's say this gives me a deep link that I can send to somebody, and they can just click it and they see a summary of the transaction, whether it's happening right now, whether it is already confirmed, and just to be sure that this is actually happening and the money was sent. Then the second thing is verifying a deposit. So somebody sends me Monero, they can send me the transaction ID, I put in my key and some other details, and then I can verify whether the system's already processed it, if this should have been arrived in my account, wallet. And then there are these explore the network options, which is just kind of seeing what activity is currently happening in the system. And let's start with that. So I can see the latest blocks that are being processed. A block typically has a ton of information in it. Let's just look at this block here. So lots of data here. And I can click into each one of those and see more information. So my idea here was to just say, yep, this block was mined 7 minutes ago. There was one transaction in it. I'm trying to visualize transactions a little bit to make it obvious. What are some of the heavier ones were, how much, how full the network currently is, let's say. And there's also size in kilobyte, which is not that useful, but I'll still put it in. I can get a deep link to this block, or I can expand it and just see transactions that are happening inside. It's also very simple here. I see transactions ID, fee, payment ID, so avoiding a lot of the technical information. If I want all of the details, I can go in. Then I can click down here. I can see all the inputs, outputs, ring members. And once again, these things probably don't make sense for the majority of people. So the transaction summary, again, is just focused on the basic things. This is currently being sent. There are 4 confirmations. When, let's say, around 20 confirmations, you can be pretty sure that it arrived, or that's kind of a flexible number here. The fee, which block it was in, transaction ID, payment ID. Payment ID, for anybody who doesn't know, is it's a unique identifier. So I sent Monero to somebody. I could just type in anything to say it was from me and what purpose it was, what date it was, or anything. So the recipient can then know who that payment came from and what the reason was. So it could be, I'm paying you back for drinks last night or something like that. And this updates automatically, so you can always see. You can send this to somebody. They can keep it open and keep it open until this says confirmation done. Then let's go into the queue. These are the current transactions that are being processed by the system. So there are 3 transactions only waiting right now. That will be covered in the next blocks. This also updates once a minute, and then you just see the next transactions that are still waiting. And whenever transactions is done, it disappears from here, and then it ends up in a block. We have network info, which is just really some basic summary of what's currently happening. And now let's go into receipts. So this is what I mentioned earlier. I send Monero to somebody and I want to have a proof, basically. This is kind of tricky. you need the transaction ID, which we get from uSend. You need the address to the person you sent it to. And then you need the private transaction key. Monero has 4 different keys, and this can be a little bit tricky because sometimes they're called private, sometimes they're called secret. And actually, this is a private transaction key. This is not the private wallet key. So it's not, this can be kind of tricky to figure out. That's why there's a link to the guide and this little option here to pull up the also kind of a guide basically on the Monero website. But I'm just going to put in some test setup that I have here that uses completely fake data. And then when you do this, you get this unique link that you can send to somebody, and it hides some of the technical data down here. There's lots of data that I'm not even showing here. I'm just kind of putting in some of the basics here in details. And then it's really just a highlight. What do you want to know? This is how much was sent. It is confirmed by the system, so it should have arrived. It was sent a year ago. When you click it, you get to the block. This was the fee, this is the address, and the transaction ID. If there's a payment ID, it will also show it, but in this case there isn't. So this is pretty much all you need to know, and all the other stuff is secondary for, I think, the kind of a normal use case. And this was for receipts. And let's look at the deposits. This is similar, but instead of the private transaction key, you need to have your private or your secret view key. It's the same thing, it's just labeled differently. And it can be confusing, these keys. And this is very similar. This was received, it is confirmed, it was a year ago, this was the fee, and that's it. So very, very simple use cases, actually. So that was kind of my approach right now. I'm sure there are other use cases. I'm just starting to show this to people to get feedback. And so I'm really curious to hear what you think and what's missing here, what could be improved, what's not clear. There's definitely some of the language around keys and what transactions are, what blocks are. I'm sure there are a lot of details that could be improved. So I'm really curious to hear those. Thanks.